Welcome back. This is Chapter 4, The Enemy, written by Per S. Back. And now I'm going to explain this chapter to you. So here we go. She herself served him, for none of the servants would enter the room. Hannah herself went in to attend to the wounds of the patient, since none of the servants in the house was ready to go in and attend to the wounds of the patient. And since she had to enter the room all alone, and so she had to apologize to him, to the enemy. When she came in the first time, she saw him summon his small strength to be prepared for some fearful thing, and the first time she entered after the enemy's regaining consciousness, she found him getting prepared, getting ready for some sort of a deadly fight with her, since he believed that the lady coming in was a part of enemy, and that she was there to arrest him once more, and he was not prepared to get arrested the second time, and he was preparing to save himself, protect himself. "Don't be afraid," she begged him softly, and very softly, very humbly she begged, she requested him, she assured him that he was not to worry. There was nothing to be afraid of. "How come you speak English?" he gasped, and then he was so surprised, he was shocked. He was very much surprised that she was speaking English. A Japanese speaking English was a big surprise, which was, of course, pleasant one for him, and he wanted to know how could she speak English, although he uttered these words gasping. "I was a long time in America," she replied. And Hannah replied she was there in America for a very long time, and due to this she could speak English well. She saw that he wanted to reply to that, but he could not, and so she knelt and fed him gently from the porcelain spoon. He ate unwillingly, but still he ate. Here she noticed that he wanted to respond, he wanted to reply, but he could not due to weakness in body. And so she knelt down and fed him gently from the porcelain spoon, that is a special kind of clay spoon, that is china clay spoon. He ate, though he ate, but he was not very willing to take the food. Unwillingly he accepted the food. "Now you will soon be strong," she said, not liking him and yet moved to comfort him. "Now," she said, you would soon be very strong," since he was accepting the food, since he was taking the food, so she knew that soon he would be strong enough to stand on his feet and to react to others. Though she said all this not because she liked him, not because she grew a soft corner for him, but she went to comfort him, she went to make him feel good. He did not answer, and to this he did not answer. When Sadao came in the third day after the operation, he found the young man sitting up, his face bloodless with the effort. And on the third day, when Sadao came after the operation, that is, on the previous 2 days, or the first 2 days, he did not come to the patient. On the third day, he came to him to check, to examine him, and there he found that the patient was sitting up. Seeing the doctor, he sat up, though he had no idea who that person was, and that's why probably he sat up. His face bloodless. As he sat up, there was no color. It turned pale due to the effort. "Lie down," Sadao cried. "Do you want to die?" Sadao shouted, lie down. "Don't try such things if you want to live. If you repeat these kind of things, you will simply kill yourself." He forced the man down gently and strongly and examined the wound, and then he forced him lie on his bed, and then examined the wound. "You may kill yourself if you do this sort of thing," he scolded, and in a scolding manner he informed him if he repeated such kind, he warned him, if he repeated such kind of things, then he would kill himself. "What are you going to do with me?" the boy muttered. He looked just now barely 17. "Are you going to hand me over now?" Or this young man, this patient, asked a question to him. What was he going to do with him? That was his question. The boy looked as if he were 17 years of age, not even 17. And he asked if he was considering to hand him over to the police. For a moment Sadao did not answer. He finished his examination and then pulled the silk quilt over the man, and Sadao did not answer. For a moment he was considering all the options. He finished his examination. He nicely examined the wound, and after that, pulling the silk quilt over the man, and then he said, "I do not know myself what I shall do with you." He said even he had no idea as what he was going to do with him. I ought of course to give you to the police. You are a prisoner of war. No, do not tell me anything. He said since he was a prisoner of war, so he should rather hand him over to the police. And he requested him not to beg him of anything. He put up his hand as he saw the young man was about to speak. He then put up his hand. He raised his hand as the young man was about to speak. "Do not even tell me your name unless I ask it." And he warned him, he cautioned him not to speak even his name, not to speak a word, not even his name, unless he was asked for it. They looked at each other for a moment, and then the young man closed his eyes and turned his face to the wall. And for a moment both of them looked at each other, since both of them were feeling a little insecure, since the patient was not knowing what his fate was there, whether he would live or he would die. He was not sure whether he would be handed over to the police again. There was insecurity in his mind. At the same time, there was insecurity because Sadao, being a citizen, he had certain obligations to the nation. So there were also a lot of questions in his mind. So that's why he was worried. He was tensed. So both of them looked at each other for a moment, and then the young man closed his eyes and turned his face to the wall. Being disappointed, he turned his face to the wall. Okay, he whispered, his mouth a bit aligned. He just muttered, he just said, okay. And since it was a disappointment for the patient, he was disappointed. He thought that the doctor would come to his help, so he had that hope in with him. But he was denied, he was refused any help, and so he was disappointed, and that disappointment was obvious on his face, in his mouth. Outside the door, Hannah was waiting for Sadao. He saw at once that she was in trouble, and outside the gate, outside the door, outside the room, his wife Hannah was waiting for him, and he noticed from there that she was a little worried. Sadao, Yumi tells me the servants feel they cannot stay if we hide this man here anymore, and she informed him that the servants were unwilling to stay there until the enemy was there in the room, in their house. She tells me that they are saying that you and I were so long America that we have forgotten to think of our own country first. They think we like Americans. So Yumi informed, she told her that since both of them, both Hannah and Sadao, spent a lot of time in America, so they had developed some kind of love for the Americans, and that they had forgotten to think of their countrymen first. It is not true, Sadao said harshly. Americans are our enemies, but I have been trained not to let a man die if I can help it. Being agitated, being annoyed at the remarks made by the servants at home, he harshly said that it was not true. Americans were the enemies, but the point was that he had been trained, he had been instructed, he had been taught not to do injustice, to save a life if it was under his control. If he could do it, he should try and help save a life. The servants cannot understand that, she said anxiously, and his wife Hannah said, getting worried, being very, disappointed. She said that servants cannot understand the sentiment. No, he agreed, and Sadao agreed too, that servants are people working at the lower level cannot understand the sentiment. neither seemed able to say more, and somehow the household dragged on. So here, from this point, they could not continue on the same topic, and then the household issues dragged on, pulled on. That is, after that, they did not talk over that issue. Rather, they discussed on household issues. The servants grew more watchful. Now the servants were more cautious. Their courtesy was as careful as ever. Their respect or the honoring of the master and mistress remained as usual, but their eyes were cold upon the pair to whom they were hired. But there was no sympathy, there was no respect in their eyes for their master and mistress now. It is clear what our master ought to do, the old gardener said one morning. And one morning the old gardener, the oldest of the lot, said one morning that the master knows his duties well. He knew what were his obligations, what were his duties. He had worked with flowers all his life and had been a specialist too in moss. For Sadao's father, he had made one of the finest moss gardens in Japan. And here, the author gives a description of this servant and said here that he dedicated all his life to the flowers. He worked all his life with the flowers and had been specialized, or say he had specialization in moss. He had developed special skills in the treatment of moss, and for that reason he made one of the finest garden of moss there in Japan for Sadao's father. Sweeping the bright green carpet constantly so that not a leaf or a pine needle marred the velvet of its surface. And he was so committed, so dedicated to his work that he allowed not even a leaf on that soft surface, not even a needle, pine needle on the surface, on the velvet surface, on the soft surface of the moss. What he believed that even these damaged the surface. My old master's son knows very well what he ought to do, he now said, pinching a bud from a bush as he spoke. Now the old gardener plucked a flower from the bush and pinched it and squeezed it, letting out the anger within him, and said at the same moment, at the same time, that his old master's son knew very well what were his obligations, what were his duties. When the man was so near death, why did he not let him bleed? When the man was so close to his death, and when he was dying a natural death, why the master went there to save his life? The young master is so proud of his skill to save life that he saves any life, the cook said contemptuously. Now the cook, in a voice of complaint, said scornfully that his master was not careful. He didn't pay any heed to whether he was saving the life of a friend or an enemy. Since he was so proud, so boastful of his talent, because he was blessed with such a talent that he could give life to a dying man, and he was proud of it, and he was not careful whether he saved a life of a friend or an enemy. She split a fowl's neck skillfully and held the fluttering bird and let its blood flow into the roots of a wisteria vine. Now Yumi skillfully broke the neck of a fowl, that is a hen, and held the quivering bird near the root of wisteria vine so that the blood could seep into the roots of this vine. Blood is the best of fertilizers, and the old gardener would not let her waste a drop of it, since the gardener knew that the blood was the best of fertilizers for a plant, so he would not allow Yumi to waste even a drop of it. It is the children of whom we must think, Yumi said sadly. Now, getting sad, Yumi said that we all must be very careful of our children. We must think of our children. What will be their fate if their father is condemned as a traitor? And she expressed her concern, her fear, as what would happen in case Sadao was condemned. He was found to be a traitor. What would be the condition of these kids? They did not try to hide what they said from the ears of Hannah as she stood arranging the day's flower in the veranda nearby. And here the servants did not try to hide their thoughts as they were exchanging their thoughts, as they were talking to one another. They did not try to hide their thoughts, their feelings, though they knew that the mistress was nearby arranging flowers in the veranda, and that she could hear them, what they were talking about. And she knew they spoke on purpose that she might hear, and Hannah knew it that they spoke things on purpose so that their message could reach the master and the mistress. That they were right, she knew too, in most of her being. Even Hannah knew that they were right, they were not wrong. But there was another part of her which she herself could not understand. But there was another part, another, say, soul, another half of Hannah, upon which there was no control of her, upon which she could not exercise her control. And even she could not understand it. It was not sentimental liking of the prisoner. She had come to think of him as a prisoner, and it was not sentimental liking of the prisoner and that the other half of Hannah, even that half of Hannah, that mind of Hannah, felt that the patient should survive, that the patient should live. It was not sentimental. She was not getting any sentimental or sentimentally, emotionally. She was liking the prisoner. She had come to think of him as a prisoner. For her, the patient, the enemy, was just a prisoner. She had not liked him even yesterday when he had said, in his impulsive way, "Anyway, let me tell you that my name is Tom." She had only bowed a little distant bow. She saw hurt in his eyes, but did not wish to assuage it. Indeed, he was a great trouble in this house. So let me explain this part to you now. Hannah didn't give in to the tender approach whereby the wounded enemy expected some favorable, friendly remark or gesture from the other end. But Hannah was not impressed. She gave him a cold response instead. She found disappointment in his eyes, but did not try to make him feel any good, since his presence had already caused uproar in her house. Next part. As for Sadao, every day he examined the wound carefully. The last stitches had been pulled out this morning, and the young man would in a fortnight be nearly as well as ever. Now, Sadao regularly monitored the progress of the wounded enemy, and that morning only all his stitches had been removed, giving a hope to his speedy recovery. Sadao went back to his office and carefully typed a letter to the chief of the police, reporting the whole matter. On the 21st day of February, an escaped prisoner was washed up onto the shore in front of my house. So far he typed, and then he opened a secret drawer of his desk and then put the unfinished report into it. Now, and from there he moved to his office and began typing a letter to police chief, whereby he reported the entire episode as how on the day of 21st February an escaped prisoner was spotted on the shore near his house. Here the unfinished letter was stopped and then placed it in a secret drawer of his desk. Now moving on to next para now. On the 7th day after that, two things happened. In the morning the servants left together, their belongings tied in large square cotton kerchiefs. So here two significant happenings mark the 7th day from this one. At a time, all the servants left the services of that family and moved out with all their belongings tied in a large cotton kerchiefs. Now, when Hannah got up in the morning, nothing was done. The house not clean and the food not prepared, and she knew what it meant. She was dismayed and even terrified, but her pride as a mistress would not allow her to show it. Instead, she inclined her head gracefully when they appeared before her in the kitchen, and she paid them off and thanked them for all that they had done for her. So, on this part, what happened, let's find. In the morning, Hannah noticed ominous signs of revolt, as none of the household work was done by them. This shocked and terrified her, but she didn't let her emotions out. On the contrary, she upheld her pride of being their mistress, paid their salaries, and thanked them for their long and dedicated service. They were crying, but she did not cry. The cook and the gardener had served Sadao since he was a little boy in his father's house, and Yumi cried because of the children. She was so grieving that after she had gone, she ran back to Hannah. So here in this part, let's find what happened. All of them were in tears except Hannah. The cook and the gardener felt terribly bad because their association with the family had been very long. That is, they had very long association with the family. So long that they entered the services when Saddam was only a little boy. Yumi cried because she was emotionally very close to the kids, and after leaving the house, she came running back to Hannah, unable to bear the pain of separation. If the baby misses me too much tonight, send for me. I'm going to my own house and you know where it is. So here, Yumi asked her mistress Hannah to send for her, to call her, to summon her from her house for that very night if the baby cried, if the baby missed her too much. Thank you, Hannah said, smiling, but she told herself she would not send for Yumi however the baby cried. But Hannah was resolute. She expressed her gratitude for her concern for the baby, but she was firm not to do so however hard it cried, however hard the baby cried. She made the breakfast and Sadao helped with the children. Neither of them spoke of the servants beyond the fact that they were gone, but after Hannah had taken morning food to the prisoner, she came back to Sadao. So here, Hannah prepared breakfast that morning, while Sadao took care of the children, and in this case, both of them worked for each other, both of them supported each other, but they did not speak of the servants beyond a point, beyond a limit, though they were suffering. Yet they didn't speak of the servants beyond a limit, beyond a point. After preparing breakfast, she went to the wounded enemy with the breakfast and then returned to Sadao to talk over the issue. Next para. Why is it we cannot see clearly what we ought to do? She asked him. Even the servants see more clearly than we do. Why are we different from other Japanese? So here, Hana spoke with assertion and asked Sadao for the reason why they were not clear in their mind regarding what they should do in such a situation, whereas the servants could see things clearly. She questioned why they were different from other Japanese. Now moving on to the last para now. Sadao did not answer, but a little later he went into the room where the prisoner was and said brusquely, "Today you may get up on your feet." Sadao did not answer. He went into the room of the prisoner a little later and spoke to him in sharp tone and advised him to stand up on his feet. "I want you to stay up only 5 minutes at a time. Tomorrow you may try it twice as long. It would be well that you get back your strength as quickly as possible." So here Sadao wished. He longed that the enemy soldier regained his strength as quickly as possible, and for that he advised him to get onto his feet for 5 minutes at first, and then increase the time with another 5 minutes, and so on. This physical workout would certainly build up his strength. Next para. He saw the flicker of terror on the young face that was still very pale. "Okay," the boy murmured. Evidently, he was determined to say more. "I feel I ought to thank you, doctor, for having saved my life." So here, though he welcomed doctor's advice, a tinge of terror could easily be witnessed on his face. With resolve, this young man thanked Dr. Sadao for saving his life. "Don't thank me too early," Sadao said coldly. He saw the flicker of terror again in the boy's eyes, terror as unmistakable as an animal's. The scars on his neck were crimson for a moment. Those scars, what were they? Sadao did not ask. So here, at that point, Doctor promptly and harshly reacted to him, saying not to thank him so early. Again, the same terror appeared, this time in his eyes. This terror could be equated with the one found in the eyes of a wild beast upon facing its killer. Now, he noticed some scars on his neck, which turned crimson red for a moment, but he did not care to ask him what those scars were. Afternoon, the second thing happened. Hannah, working hard on unaccustomed labor, saw a messenger come to the door in official uniform. Her hands went weak and she could not draw her breath. The servants must have told already. She ran to Sadao, gasping, unable to utter a word. But by then the messenger had simply followed her through the garden, and there he stood. She pointed at him helplessly. The second thing happened in the afternoon the same day. While working hard to complete the day's work that she was not used to, she discovered a messenger coming to the door in official uniform. She became unusually nervous at this sight, assuming with fear that the servants had disclosed everything to the police. She went running to Sadao, breathlessly, unable to utter even a single word. But by that time, the messenger had already reached there. Sadao looked up from his book. He was in his office, the other portion of which was thrown open to the garden for the southern sunshine. "What is it?" he asked the messenger, and then he rose, seeing the man's uniform. "You are to come to the palace," the man said. "The old general is in pain again." "Oh," Hannah breathed, "is that all? So, here." Sadao now looked up from his book and pointed at him. "That is the messenger." Above the room set up, the other partition of the office was open to the garden for sunlight coming from southern direction. As Sadao was possibly handed over a written message, he lifted his eyes to find a man in uniform in front of him. He informed that the general was in pain again and that he was summoned to the palace. These words of the messenger came as a big relief to Hannah, who then inquired if that was all he had to say. "All?" the messenger exclaimed. "Is it not enough?" "Indeed it is," she replied. "I am very sorry." When Sadao came to say goodbye, she was in the kitchen, but doing nothing. The children were asleep, and she sat merely resting for a moment, more exhausted from her fright than from work. So in this passage, let's see what happened. The messenger was taken aback at this remark of the lady, and asked her to confirm if that was not a reason good enough to be worried about. Hannah felt sorry for such a remark, since she had certain other thoughts running in her mind. Sadao now got ready to move out to the palace. Before leaving, he came to Hannah in the kitchen, where she was relaxing. She was not tired from the work. Her exhaustion, her fatigue was more of mental in nature. The fear of the unseen danger had bogged her down. "They had come to arrest you," she said. He gazed down into her anxious eyes. "I must get rid of this man for your sake," he said in distress. Somehow I must get rid of him. So here in this line we find Hannah in kitchen, and there she revealed why she was filled with worry at the sight of the man in uniform. She thought the police had come to arrest him, and Sadao could see this anxiety in her eyes very clearly. Pained at his suffering, he vowed to remove him, that is, the enemy, the wounded soldier, from the house. Next para. Sadao goes to see the general. Of course, the general said weakly, "I understand fully, but that is because I once took a degree in Princeton, so few Japanese have." So here, reaching the palace, he disclosed everything to the general, who showed his sympathy to the doctor and downplayed all that related to the matter, and said he could easily understand his psychology, as he himself had a degree from Princeton, a rare thing, a rare feat for a Japanese. "I care nothing for the man, Excellency," Sadao said, "but having operated on him with such success." Here, justifying himself, Sadao said he cared very little for the man. His only concern was the success received after such operation should not get undone because of the carelessness during recovery. "Yes, yes," the general said. "It only makes me feel you more indispensable to me. Evidently, you can save anyone. You are so skilled. You say? You think I can stand one more such attack as I have had today?" "Not more than one," Sadao said. So here, the general interrupted, saying it proved his word once again, and that's why he was so desired there. He had high praise for his skills, and inquired if he stood one more chance to bear such hot attack. Sadao plainly answered, "Not more than once." "Then certainly I can allow nothing to happen to you," the general said with anxiety. His long pale Japanese face became expressionless, which meant that he was indeed thought. "You cannot be arrested," the general said, closing his eyes. "Suppose you were condemned to death, and the next day I had to have an operation." So here, the general showed worried expression on his face and asserted that he couldn't be arrested, because if he was arrested and the next day only he had to have an operation, and then that would bring risk to his life. Next, "There are other surgeons, Excellency," Sadao suggested. "None, I trust," the general replied. "The best ones have been trained by Germans and would consider the operation successful even if I die." The general remarked these things, and upon that Sadao answered. He said there were other surgeons who could treat him as well. But the general outrightly rejected them, saying the best of them had been trained by the Germans, who claimed operation successful even if the patient died after it. So he had no trust upon those doctors. He had no faith on the German trained doctors, that is, the doctors trained by the Germans. I do not care for their point of view, he sighed. It seems a pity that we cannot better combine the German ruthlessness with the American sentimentality. Then you could turn your prisoner over to execution, and yet I could be sure you would not murder me while I was unconscious. The general laughed. He had an unusual sense of humor. As Japanese, could you not combine these two foreign elements? He asked. So here, saying this, General laughed and asked him if Sadao could combine both these elements. Next, Sadao smiled. I am not quite sure, he said, but for your sake, I would be willing to try, Excellency. So here Sadao smiled at that and said, though he was not sure if he could combine these two elements in him, but he said he should like to try this for his sake. Next, the general shook his head. I had rather not be the test case, he said. He felt suddenly weak and the general shook his head. I had rather not be the test case, he said. He felt suddenly weak and overwhelmed with the cares of his life as an official in times such as these, when repeated victory brought great responsibilities all over the South Pacific. So here, shaking his head, the general remarked lightly that he would not like to be a test case. Then he felt weak all of a sudden. The burden of huge responsibility of maintaining success all over South Pacific was taking toll on his health and was showing it on his health. So this is all for now. Thank you. Saying this, General laughed and asked him if Sadao could combine both these elements. Next, Sadao smiled. I am not quite sure, he said, but for your sake, I would be willing to try, Excellency. So here Sadao smiled at that and said, though he was not sure if he could combine these two elements in him, but he said he should like to try this for his sake. The general shook his head. I had rather not be the test case, he said. He felt suddenly weak and overwhelmed with the cares of his life as an official in times such as these, when repeated victory brought great responsibilities all over the South Pacific. So here, shaking his head, the general remarked lightly that he would not like to be a test case. Then he felt weak all of a sudden. The burden of huge responsibility of maintaining success all over South Pacific was taking toll on his health. And so this is all for now. Thank you.